Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought my dream home, I never expected to fight for it like a fortress under siege. But my entitled neighbor, Randall Green, decided that part of my yard belonged to him. He lied, manipulated, and sabotaged. But there was one thing he didn't know. I'm not the kind of man who gives up without a fight. I never imagined that moving into my dream home would turn into a battle for my own land. When I first bought the property, I thought I had finally found peace, a place where I could relax after long days at work, fire up the grill on weekends, and enjoy my own little slice of paradise. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, a cozy two-story house with a spacious yard surrounded by a sturdy wooden fence. The previous owners had taken good care of it, and I planned to do the same. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retirees, the kind of place where you'd expect friendly nods from neighbors and the occasional block party. That's what I thought at least. But as I soon learned, every neighborhood has that one person who thinks they own more than they do. In my case, that person was Randall Green, my next-door neighbor. Randall was the kind of man who always had an air of superiority about him, the type who'd drive around in his spotless luxury SUV, wearing designer sunglasses even on cloudy days, and talk to everyone like he was doing them a favor just by acknowledging their existence. I had barely been in my house for a week when he first approached me. "Nice little place you got here," he had said, standing with his hands in the pockets of his expensive slacks, scanning my property like a landlord inspecting a rental. "This lot has some history, you know." I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just making conversation. But there was something about his tone. Something possessive, like he was hinting at something I wasn't aware of. I shrugged it off, figuring he was just one of those guys who liked to act important. Then came the strange behaviors. I'd catch him pacing along my fence line, staring at the ground as if searching for something. Other times, I'd see him standing in his backyard, arms crossed, just watching my house like a hawk. At first, I assumed he was just nosy, maybe the kind of guy who kept tabs on new neighbors. But then, one morning, everything changed. I walked outside to grab my mail and froze in my tracks. Randall was on my property, not near the fence, not in his own yard, on my damn lawn, measuring something with a tape measure. Beside him stood a man in a crisp suit, holding a clipboard and nodding along as Randall gestured towards the land. I marched over, trying to keep my temper in check. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Randall barely glanced at me. "Oh, hey Jake. Just checking some things out. Nothing to worry about." Checking what out? I stepped closer, noticing that he had spray-painted markings on my grass. My stomach tightened. Randall finally turned to me, flashing a condescending smile. "Listen, no need to get worked up. This land, well, it actually used to be part of my property." I blinked. "What?" He sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Yeah. A long time ago, before the last owners built that fence, this section of your yard was technically on my side. The lines got blurred over the years. I've been meaning to fix it, and since you just moved in, it's the perfect time to make things right." I stared at him in disbelief. "Make things right? You're on my property, Randall." The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Mr. Green is simply verifying the original property boundaries." I looked back at Randall. "This is a joke, right? You think you can just waltz in here and claim part of my yard?" Randall's smile widened. "I don't think, Jake. I know. And I've already taken steps to address it legally." Something cold settled in my chest. "Legally?" "Yep," he said, as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience. "I've consulted with my lawyer, and I've got records that suggest this section of land was wrongfully included in your sale. So I'm going to need you to move your fence back. Just a little bit, nothing crazy. We can handle this the easy way. Or—" He spread his hands in a fake gesture of goodwill. I clenched my jaw. "Get off my property, Randall." His smug expression didn't falter. "I figured you'd be difficult about this. That's why I already called the cops." I felt my stomach drop. "You called the cops?" Randall nodded. "They'll be here soon. And don't worry, I'll make sure they understand everything." I stared at him, my hands tightening into fists. My own neighbor had called the police on me for standing on my own damn land. I had no idea what kind of fight I was about to get into. But one thing was clear. Randall wasn't going to stop until he took what he wanted. I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, as Randall grinned like he had already won. The audacity of this man was staggering. Not only had he trespassed onto my property, but he had called the cops on me, on my own land. The smug confidence in his voice made my blood boil. Before I could respond, the distant wail of a siren broke the morning silence. Randall glanced at his watch, as if he had scheduled this like a business meeting. Moments later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house and 2 officers stepped out. One of them, a tall guy with a buzz cut, adjusted his belt as he approached. Randall immediately took charge. "Officers, thank you for coming. I'm Randall Green, and I called about a property dispute. This man," he gestured at me as if I were some random squatter, "is unlawfully occupying part of my land." I let out a sharp laugh. "You're unbelievable." The officer turned to me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "This is my property. I have legal documents proving that. This guy trespassed onto my land, started marking up my yard, and now he's trying to claim it as his." Randall cut in before the officer could respond. "I have records proving that this section was improperly included in the last sale. I'm simply trying to correct the mistake." I pulled out my phone, already having anticipated this nonsense, and opened an email from my realtor. "I have the official property deed right here, along with a detailed boundary survey. This land is mine." I turned the screen toward the officer. The cop took my phone, looked over the documents, then exchanged a glance with his partner. Meanwhile, Randall stood there, arms crossed, looking impatient. "Sir," the officer said, turning back to him, "the documents are clear. This property belongs to Mr. Hudson." Randall's face twitched, but he quickly recovered. "Well, I'll be taking this up with my legal team." "You do that," I shot back. The officer looked between us and let out a small sigh, clearly realizing this was going to be an ongoing issue. "For now, Mr. Green, I suggest you leave your neighbor's property. You don't have legal standing here, and trespassing laws still apply." Randall huffed but took a step back. "Fine, but this isn't over." He turned on his heel and walked off, muttering something under his breath. The officer gave me a look that seemed to say, "Good luck dealing with that guy," then nodded before heading back to his cruiser. As the police car drove away, I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself. This should have been the end of it, but deep down I knew it was just the beginning. I thought that would be the end of it. The cops had made it clear that the land was mine, and any sane person would have backed off. But Randall Green wasn't sane. He was obsessed. A few days later, I walked outside and froze in my tracks. My fence, the one that had been standing perfectly fine just yesterday, was gone. The entire section separating my yard from Randall's had been ripped out, leaving my property wide open. I stormed over to his yard, and there he was, standing with a smug smile, watching as a crew of workers dug new post holes. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Randall turned, feigning innocence. "Oh, good morning, Jake. Just fixing a long-standing issue." I decided to put my fence back where it always should have been. I could barely process the level of delusion. "That wasn't your fence, you psycho. You tore down my property." He shrugged. "That's debatable." I was already pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the cops." Randall's smirk widened. "Oh, don't bother. I already filed a claim in civil court. Until the case is settled, there's a legal injunction preventing you from making unauthorized alterations to the land." I stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said, adjusting his designer watch. "And while we're at it, my lawyer has proof that this land was wrongfully included in your sale. So really, I'm doing you a favor by correcting this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had he destroyed my fence, but now he was trying to use the legal system against me. I clenched my jaw. "You realize you just admitted to vandalizing my property, right?" Randall just smirked. "Sue me." That's exactly what I planned to do. Randall had officially crossed the line. Tearing down my fence was bad enough, but now he was trying to weaponize the legal system against me. I wasn't about to roll over and let him take what was mine, so I did exactly what he smugly suggested. I sued him. My lawyer was confident we had a solid case. I had the property deed, the land survey, photos of my fence before and after it was torn down, and even footage from my security cameras showing his crew working on my land. The lawsuit was filed, and I felt like I was finally getting the upper hand. But Randall, he wasn't backing down. He was escalating. The first sign of trouble came 2 nights later. I woke up to a loud metallic crash outside. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto my porch. My garbage cans had been knocked over, trash scattered all over the yard. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, until I noticed footprints leading toward Randall's property. The next morning, I found a long, ugly scratch on the side of my truck. It wasn't deep, but it was deliberate. I checked my security footage, but whoever did it knew exactly where my cameras were positioned and had avoided them. Then came the mysterious calls. At least 3 times a day, my phone would ring from an unknown number. When I picked up, there would be nothing but silence, or sometimes the faint sound of breathing before the caller hung up. One night, I got a call at 3 in the morning. Half asleep, I answered, expecting more silence. Instead, a distorted voice whispered, "You should move before things get worse." I bolted upright, fully awake. "Who the hell is this?" Click. I had no proof it was Randall, but I knew it was him. He was too much of a coward to face me head-on after I filed the lawsuit, so he was resorting to petty intimidation tactics. But the worst was yet to come. A few days later, I stepped outside and immediately noticed a foul stench in the air. My stomach turned as I looked toward my backyard. Someone had dumped rotting food and raw meat all over my lawn. Maggots were already writhing in the sun, and flies buzzed thick in the air. I gagged and turned toward Randall's house, and there he was, standing on his porch, sipping coffee like he hadn't just turned my yard into a biohazard zone. I stormed toward the fence, or what was left of it. "You think this is funny, Randall?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, not even trying to hide his smirk. "What are you talking about, Jake? You got a raccoon problem?" I clenched my fists so tightly my nails bit into my palms. I wanted to deck him right then and there, but that's what he wanted. He wanted me to lose my temper so he could play the victim. So instead, I took a deep breath and smiled. "Nah, just making a mental note for the cops when I file another report." His smirk faltered for just a second. "Yeah, that's right, asshole. I wasn't playing his game." I filed a police report for vandalism and harassment, but without hard evidence. All they could do was add it to the record. I knew Randall had covered his tracks well. He wasn't stupid, but I also knew one thing. People like him always take things too far, and when he did, I'd be ready. I had been patient, too patient. Randall had spent weeks pushing me, trying to break me, seeing how far he could go before I snapped. He tore down my fence, sabotaged my property, harassed me with anonymous calls, and even turned my yard into a rotting wasteland. But despite everything, I had played it smart. I documented every incident. I filed reports. I let my lawyer handle the legal side while I waited for the inevitable. The moment Randall got too confident, too reckless, and finally slipped up. That moment came on a night when I least expected it. I had just finished cleaning up the last of the garbage from my yard and was sitting on my porch, drinking a well-earned beer, when I heard it, a loud crash from the side of my house. I bolted up, adrenaline already surging through my veins. My security cameras had captured Randall's past harassment, but he had always been careful to avoid direct evidence. If this was him, and if I caught him in the act, he was done. I grabbed my phone and slipped around the side of the house, keeping to the shadows. As I rounded the corner, my stomach twisted in pure rage. There he was, Randall, holding a sledgehammer, and he was swinging it at my newly rebuilt fence. The wooden posts groaned under the force of the impact, splintering as he lifted the hammer again. He was so focused, so consumed by whatever insane vendetta he had against me, that he didn't even notice me standing there. Until I spoke. "You've lost your damn mind, Randall." He froze mid-swing, breathing hard. Then he turned to me, grinning like a lunatic. "Figured you'd show up." He lowered the hammer, resting it against the ground. "You're stubborn, Jake, I'll give you that. But let's be honest, you don't belong here." I scoffed. "Oh yeah? And you do." "I built this neighborhood," he sneered. "Lived here longer than anyone. You're just some blue-collar nobody who thinks a few legal documents mean something." He shook his head, chuckling darkly. "But they don't, because in the end, power wins. And you have none." I took a slow step forward, voice low and even. "That's so." Randall's smirk widened. "Yeah." He tightened his grip on the hammer. "And I don't see any cops around, do you?" It hit me all at once. He wanted this. He was pushing me into a fight. If I swung first, if I lost my temper, he'd turn this on me. He'd go to the police, claim self-defense, and I'd be the one in cuffs. So I did the last thing he expected. I laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, a full, amused laugh. Randall's smirk twitched. "What's so funny?" I stepped closer, shaking my head. "You, man. You really think this is going to end well for you?" He scowled. "I don't think. I know." Then he swung the hammer at me. I barely dodged in time. The weight of the swing sent him stumbling forward, throwing him off balance. That's when I moved. I slammed into him, knocking the hammer from his hands. It hit the ground with a heavy thud as Randall swung wildly at me. His punch grazed my jaw, but it was sloppy. He was running on pure rage, and I had spent years working construction. I knew how to take a hit, and, more importantly, I knew how to hit back. My fist connected with his gut, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled backward, tripping over a loose stone, and fell directly into a massive, muddy puddle. I stood over him as he coughed, trying to push himself up, his expensive jacket now soaked in filth. Then, as if fate itself had a sense of humor, a loud splat echoed in the night. I blinked. Randall froze. A bird had just shit directly on his head. For a moment, there was silence. Then I burst out laughing. Randall, humiliated, furious, and covered in mud and bird crap, let out a primal scream of rage. He lunged at me, but before he could even get to his feet, red and blue lights flooded the yard. The police had arrived. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the night, illuminating Randall's mud-covered, rage-twisted face. He had barely gotten to his knees when the sound of car doors slamming shut filled the air. "Hands where we can see them!" one of the officers shouted, their flashlights aimed directly at us. Randall froze. His breath came in ragged gasps, his expensive jacket dripping with filth, and of course, the humiliating white splatter of bird shit right on his head. If the situation weren't so serious, I might have laughed again. Instead, I stepped back, hands raised, keeping my voice steady. "Officers, you might want to check my security cameras before you jump to any conclusions." One of the cops, the same officer who had responded the first time Randall called them weeks ago, narrowed his eyes as he looked between us. Then he sighed, already looking tired of Randall's bullshit. "We got a call about a property dispute," he said, glancing at the sledgehammer lying in the dirt next to Randall, "and an attempted assault." I gestured toward the cameras mounted on my house. "Everything's on video. This psycho came onto my property, destroyed my fence, then tried to hit me with a hammer. I defended myself." Randall, still on his knees, suddenly found his voice. "That's a lie," he shouted, pointing a shaking, mud-streaked finger at me. "He attacked me. I was just trying to fix a misunderstanding, and he jumped me." The cops didn't even look convinced. One of them turned to me. "You willing to provide that footage?" "With pleasure," I said, already pulling out my phone. As soon as the officers saw the clear footage, Randall trespassing, him swinging the hammer at me first, and then me knocking him into the mud, their decision was made. The officer closest to Randall pulled out his cuffs. "Randall Green, you're under arrest for destruction of private property, trespassing, and assault with a deadly weapon." The moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists, Randall lost it. "This is a mistake," he screamed, thrashing like a child throwing a tantrum. "He set me up. He provoked me. I'll have your jobs for this. I'm calling my lawyer. His rant was cut short when one of the officers shoved him into the back of the squad car. I crossed my arms, watching as he howled in outrage, his once pristine designer outfit now reduced to mud, sweat, and bird shit. Poetic justice. One of the cops turned to me. "We'll need you to file an official statement. And if you're pressing charges—" "Oh, I'm pressing charges," I said without hesitation. "And believe me, I'm gonna enjoy every second of it." The trial was swift and brutal for Randall. My lawyer had a rock-solid case. The evidence against Randall was undeniable. The security footage showing him breaking my fence and attacking me. The history of police reports documenting his harassment. The testimonies from neighbors who had seen his previous antics and confirmed that he had a long history of bullying others in the neighborhood. Randall's high-priced attorney tried every trick in the book, claiming that he was the real victim, that I had baited him into the fight, that he was just trying to reclaim what was his. But when the judge reviewed the footage, his face remained stone cold. "Mr. Green," the judge said, folding his hands on the bench, "this is some of the most absurd entitlement I've ever seen in my courtroom." Randall turned pale. The final ruling came down hard. 3 years in state prison for destruction of property, trespassing, and aggravated assault. He also had to pay me back for all the damage he caused. When the bailiffs escorted him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Hudson," he spat. "I'll get even." I smirked. Not for at least 3 years, you won't. I watched as they dragged him away, his expensive shoes scuffing against the marble floor, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I finally felt at peace. For weeks, I had been on edge, constantly watching my back, waiting for the next scheme, sabotage, or tantrum from Randall. Now, nothing. No harassing phone calls, no mysterious trash piles in my yard, no smug grins from my neighbor's porch. Because Randall Green wasn't my neighbor anymore, he was rotting in a prison cell where he belonged. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe easier without him. The first few days after the trial, I noticed something. People who had once avoided making eye contact with me were suddenly friendly. I caught my next-door neighbors, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, sweeping their front porch and smiling at me for the first time. "You really did us all a favor," Mr. Henderson said, tipping his cap as I walked past one morning. "That man made life hell for anyone who wouldn't play by his rules." I stopped. "So he pulled this kind of stunt before?" "Oh, plenty of times," Mrs. Henderson said, shaking her head. "He tried to bully a single mom down the block into selling her house because he didn't like that she put up solar panels. Got a young couple fined for parking their car too close to his driveway. But no one ever stood up to him like you did." I let that sink in. Randall had always been a bully, but until now, no one had ever called him out on it. Well, that was over now. Even with Randall gone, I still had work to do. My fence needed to be rebuilt, again. The legal battle had drained some of my savings, but Randall's court-ordered compensation more than covered the repairs. I hired a crew to put up a new, reinforced fence, even stronger than before. Steel posts, security locks on the gates, and an updated camera system because while Randall was gone, I wasn't about to let someone like him mess with me again. The day the new fence was completed, I stood back and admired it. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was a symbol that no one, no matter how rich, entitled, or manipulative, was going to take what was mine. A few weeks later, I got a call from my lawyer. "You're going to love this," he said, barely containing his amusement. "Remember how Randall always bragged about his business?" I leaned back in my chair. "Yeah, the real estate empire or whatever." "Well," my lawyer continued, "turns out a convicted felon doesn't make for a great investment. His company took a massive hit after the trial. Investors pulled out. The board of directors kicked him out. And now they're liquidating his assets." I laughed out loud. "Perfect. So what happens to his house?" I asked. "Oh, it's being foreclosed on," my lawyer said. "Should hit the market in a few months." I grinned. Poetic justice. Randall had spent months trying to take part of my land, and in the end, he lost everything. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, beer in hand, dog at my feet, enjoying the kind of peace I hadn't felt since moving in. The air was cool, the stars were out, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to keep one eye on my security cameras every night. That's when my neighbor Tom walked by and gave me a nod. "Hell of a thing you did, Jake," he said, grinning. "Neighborhood's never been quieter." I chuckled. "Yeah, it's nice not having to worry about a lunatic breaking my fence every week." Tom smirked. "You know what the funniest part is?" I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He leaned in, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "I heard Randall's been having a real rough time in prison." I took a sip of my beer. "Good." Tom's grin widened. "Yeah, word is his cellmates have been calling him bird shit green." I nearly choked on my drink, bursting out laughing. That was the perfect ending.